Welcome back to Moby Dick. Today we're going to go through chapter 24 and chapter 25, which are the Advocate and Postscript. Ishmael has just finished telling us about the lee shore, in which he debates the wisdom of abandoning oneself to the wildness and honesty of the sea, as opposed to remaining in the safe confines of perhaps a delusional shoreline existence. In the Advocate and in Postscript, he goes to great pains to explain to us why whaling is in fact noble and heroic, necessary, and admirable, as much as, if not more so, than any other profession on land. After these two chapters, we go to two chapters called Knights and Squires, in which he starts to talk more about other people on the Pequod. But for now, we're just going to talk about the Advocate and Postscript. I'm not going to go through step by step as he lays out the arguments for why whaling is noble and important. You can go through powermobydick.com, and honestly, just reading it yourself, you'll be able to figure out the various steps that he takes. But what I want to discuss is why he's doing this, because we don't know. I'm going to come right out here and tell you that I actually don't know what he's doing, but I find it very interesting that he's going through so much work. He's stalling, I think. I think he is stalling and avoiding telling us the story itself. For some reason, he has spent now over 100 pages preparing us for this voyage, and he hasn't actually gone on it. We've heard about our whaling ship, and we've heard the name of Captain Ahab, but we don't actually know what's going on. Now, this is a major complaint that people have thrown at Moby Dick. People find it boring, or they think that it rambles on unnecessarily. As I've mentioned before in earlier broadcasts, I actually think that it is probably in these apparently unnecessary digressions away from the action of the plot that we find the real meaning of this story. There is something here that Ishmael is afraid of. I don't know if he doubts himself. I don't know if he doubts us. I don't know if he doubts his narrative. It could be that he doubts all of them, of course. These aren't mutually exclusive options. But in the Advocate in particular, he goes to a great deal of effort to convince us, if we haven't already been convinced, that whaling is arguably the most important and noble profession in the world. And these words are very important to him. So he goes through what I like to think of as a shotgun approach to proving to us why. Just in case one argument doesn't work, he's going to come at us from another direction. To me, this seems like a very weak and immature, amateurish debate tactic. He's just throwing the kitchen sink at us, hoping that something is going to stick. Now, is he trying to convince us, or is he trying to convince himself? I don't really know the answer here. I think that it's important to figure out what the questions are, because I suspect that Melville wants us to keep all of these various questions in mind. Each interpretation or each question is going to lead us to a different answer of the text, which also makes it a kind of a headache to read, but it helps embody the truth. If we are really talking about the nature of madness or civilization, or if we are talking about the nature of truth itself, or heroic action, then we shouldn't expect there to be a kind of Hallmark card punchline to the story. It's going to be complicated, and it's going to be confusing, and it should be scary to look at. It makes sense that there is so much ambiguity, and it makes sense that, kind of like a parabola, we get closer and closer and closer, but we can't quite touch the axis of truth here. I don't know if we should think that Ishmael is crazy or a fool. Is he playing us? Because he could be. I mean, we don't know that he's trustworthy. I posited right out of the gate that I don't think he is. But I'm not sure in which direction his, let's call it dishonesty, runs. I mean, does he himself believe himself? Or is he deliberately misleading us? We don't really know. But he's going through a lot of work here to persuade us that whaling is important, to persuade us of both his kind of his savoir-faire, his urbane knowledge of the world. But then again, he's also, potentially a country schoolmaster who makes a lot of mistakes. I think that Melville wants us to question what we know. Not just what we know about Moby Dick, but what we know about ourselves. One of the themes that's coming up a lot is the questioning of whether or not we really know what we think we know and how it is that we come to these conclusions. I find it very interesting that after his chapter on, the advocate, he adds a postscript. Why not simply add in his thoughts from the postscript into the advocate himself? He's writing this down, right? Couldn't he just revise it? Why is it necessary to add a postscript? Also, in the advocate, there are 2 instances where he puts in footnotes about, topics of cetology, which come up later in very long and very funny, inaccurate chapters. Later, he mentions that he's going to talk in more depth about this topic in the future. However, the footnotes themselves don't sound like him. I mean, is there somebody else footnoting this text? I don't know. I don't think we have to know. Honestly, I really don't think that Moby Dick requires us to figure out the truth. I think that it's challenging us to acknowledge how much we don't know. The story itself, the narrator itself, is a kind of white whale. We're going to have to work for this. We're going to have to abandon the safety of our tidy narratives with a beginning, middle, and end, and go out onto the wilds of this bizarre narrator who may or may not be telling us what really happened. As maddening as it is to listen to it and to read it and puzzle through it, the more we work for something, the more worth it has for us. I think it's a conquest worth pursuing. We may think that we disagree with Ishmael. We may think that he's crazy, unreliable, delusional, psychotic even. But it could be that in his madness, we find what is most honest and most real. We need to keep going.